Hello friends, so today's video is going to be the mid-year book tag. There are 13 questions to this tag, so I'm just going to jump right into it. Question 1 is, what is the best book you've read so far this year? Which some years this is easy to answer because there will be a standout book that I can't shut up about. This year there have been quite a few books that I've really enjoyed, and some of them are fantasy and then some of them are nonfiction, or some of them are just not fantasy books. And so I did a video recently, I don't know if it'll go up before or after this video, but it's some of the non-fantasy books that I've read this year. And I'm going to have that linked, and I'm just going to stick to answering with the fantasy. But check out that other video. The Girl with Seven Names is fantastic. Trailblazer is fantastic. Hidden Life of Trees, Secret Life of Groceries, Razorblade Tears. All of these books that aren't fantasy. I want you to hear more about them, but for the sake of not having this video be obnoxiously long and also to not repeat myself constantly, I'm just going to have that video linked. And I'll have those books linked as well, just so you can look more into them. But they're so good. Anyway, I'm just going to stick to the fantasy ones. I talked about I don't want to repeat myself, and I just recently spent, I think it was around 9 minutes in a wrap-up style video talking about this book. But you know what? I'm going to talk about it again because it was so good. And that would be Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. Thank you to the individual who recommended this author to me. I now am so excited to check out. Isn't that the best when an author, you find a new author and then they have a whole bunch of other backlist books and you're like, yay! And so I went to one of my local used bookstores looking for more books by this author and they didn't have any, and I was like, dang it. Anyway, I'm not even talking about the book. I'm just talking about how much I've been wanting to find more by this author. Thank you, first off, to the person who recommended this author to me. But Nettle and Bone is a fantasy standalone. It's really short, and that's very unusual for me to enjoy a really short book that much. But oh my gosh, is this just... It's basically perfect for what it is. It's perfect. The pacing was great, the tone, the characters, the humor, the depth, because within such a short amount of time, the author actually has so much depth. The plot seems very generic initially, but how the author handles everything is just fantastic. And the banter is maybe not even the right word, just the silliness of some of the characters. It's fantastic. It sounds very much like a story you've heard about before. We follow a young woman who is not all that remarkable in any way, but her sister, who is a princess, has been married off to this individual to secure an alliance that will help protect their kingdom. However, the man that she was married to is very unkind, and so our main character now wants to do what she can to help her sister. However, circumstances are not all that easy because of the fact that their kingdom really needs this alliance, and if our main character does something to harm the king, they're going to lose the alliance and therefore the protection that this other kingdom provides theirs. So it's not as straightforward as the main character would like, and so she's trying to find a way to do what she can to both protect her country and then also her sister. Doesn't sound like the absolute most unique story, but it is so good, and it's so funny, and it's so silly, even though the subject matter at times can be very heartbreaking. But Nettle and Bone has been fantastic. Absolutely loved it. And then also I feel like the first quarter definitely hyped this book up a lot, and I'm going to keep hyping it up, and that would be Engines of Empire. Really, really, really liked Engines of Empire. It's the first book in a series, so I don't know where the series is going to go, but I really liked that first installment. The tagline I gave it is, if Game of Thrones met Final Fantasy XII. You have 5 main perspectives in that story, 4 of which follow family members from the Hawkspur Guild. It's definitely almost like a turn-of-the-century feel where you're seeing magic sort of being left behind for advancements in technology. However, some other kingdoms, some other countries, how they utilize magic is different than the place where our main characters are from, and so you kind of see that explored. There's a lot of political maneuvering going on with one perspective in particular, but then there's also family drama, and I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's a little bit slower going at the start, and it takes a while to get to know the characters, it takes a while to get to know the world, and because it's a first installment, there are definitely a lot of pieces put in place in that first book that you don't really see anything satisfying occur as a result of those pieces, because you know they're being put there for future installments in the series. However, I loved that first book. It was great, so hyping that one up. I also really enjoyed KKE, This one I thought was absolutely beautiful. It's very different than the other two. It's much slower. It's kind of more of a character study within mythology, a character that maybe a lot of us, some of you are very familiar with this character, but I myself was not, and I absolutely loved getting to see their arc throughout the story. This is one that follows the main character from the time that she is a young girl all the way through adulthood, and there's themes of family, motherhood, friendship. There's just so much to it that I think the author handled really well. There's also this idea of wanting to respect your culture, wanting to respect your people, wanting to respect the way of things and tradition, while also wanting to progress. And when those two things can sometimes collide, how do you handle that? There's just so much in this book that I really enjoyed. It's not an action-packed fantasy whatsoever. It really takes its time, and it's one that I read slower because I do like to devour my books in a day, basically. And this is one that I kind of took my time with. So if you're somebody who likes maybe the more action-packed type of stories, I would say maybe Engines of Empire would be more your thing. But I really enjoyed this one. They're all very different. All three of the ones that I mentioned are very different from one another, but I loved all three of these. Question 2, best sequel. Finally getting around to the next question. So thus far, unless I'm just blanking, I don't know that I've read all that many sequels just yet. A lot of the sequels I'm excited for are coming later in the year, like Fury Song. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so I've read Hunger of the Gods, and I enjoyed that one, but I did enjoy book 1 more. But it might be my favorite sequel I've read this year. I read The Traitor Queen, and this is the sequel to The Bridge Kingdom. Again, completely different stories. One's Viking, Nordic, Norse feel, and then this one's fantasy romance. But a lot more on the fantasy than I was expecting. And when I say fantasy, I mean the political sides, because there's no magic in the Bridge Kingdom. But the sequel, Traitor Queen, I kind of read books 1 and 2 back to back, and so even though I know definitively where book 1 ends, in my mind it's all one long story. But I did enjoy both of those. They're definitely books that they are what I was saying about how I like to devour books. I definitely devoured The Bridge Kingdom and Traitor Queen. And then with Hunger of the Gods, that's another one that I took my time with. So I would say both of those probably would be my favorite sequels. Question 3 is a new release that you haven't read yet but want to. I've been pretty good about reading the books, the anticipated releases. So I think I'm going to have to say A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. It sounded like it is in the same kind of sort of feel as a lot of these other mythology types of stories that we've been getting. So this is probably the one that I want to get around to the most. Question 4 is the most anticipated release. I kind of already said it a second ago. Fury Song by Rosaria Munda, which would be the third and final book in the Fireborn trilogy. This follows what is basically a fantasy version of the Russian Revolution. A story that doesn't really have magic, but the only thing that makes it fantastical really is the incorporation of dragons, because that's something Rosaria Munda wanted to do, is looking at, because she has a political theory degree, and so she was looking at parts of history and was like, but what if there were dragons though? How would that change things? And I think that she's done a phenomenal job with it. I loved Fireborn. I loved the exploration of trauma. I love the way that she explores the different kinds of government and the I guess you could say, to put it simply, the pros and cons to some degree, but man, that's way too simple of a way to put it, because the desperation and the ways in which characters are faced with the most difficult of decisions in that book. Man, there's just some moments where you're like, oh, there's a certain scene where they're talking about trying to figure out how much food to give people, and that part is just so heartbreaking. But anyway, the third book comes out, and after the end of the second book, I'm like, I need that book, and I'm so excited, but I'm also so scared, and I don't know what's gonna happen, and I'm nervous. But Fury Song would be my number 1 anticipated release. I'm also very, very excited. There's quite a few I'm excited about. I am very excited for the sequel to A Magic Steeped in Poison. That first book came out this year, and its sequel will be coming out this year as well. So I'm really excited because that one was just fun. I had a really good time with it. Same can be said for the sequel to Daughter of the Moon Goddess. The sequel to that one is another one that I'm really excited to see. I know this one, a lot of people have really loved it, but then some people, it was kind of a hit or miss situation. And I quite liked it. It's not my favorite. Obviously, I didn't gush about it during question 1, but I did really like it, and I am excited to see what happens in the second book. We're also getting the conclusion, man, there's so many. We're also getting the conclusion to Mistborn Era 2, so I'm excited about that. Also, there's a lot of good ones coming out in the second half of the year. Question 5 would be the biggest disappointment, and I don't like answering this question because it just feels mean. There's something about saying disappointing that strangely feels worse than saying your least favorite. It's like a parent telling you, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. And you're like, well, that's worse. But either way, I think it's just hard in general when you're really hyping up a sequel and then the sequel isn't quite what you expected. And I think that's the case with Fevered Star. I really, really liked Black Sun, and I think Fevered Star was a little bit, for me, to put it nicely and to summarize quickly, it was just a little bit of middle book syndrome. Question 6 is biggest surprise, and I'm going to only look at this in a positive way. So the most surprising in a good way, things that I was like, oh wow, I wasn't expecting to like this so much. So Blood Heir, I thought was fantastic. I haven't had the chance to talk about this one all that much recently. I did talk about it in a beginner to advanced fantasy, kind of an if you like this, try that edition. If you haven't seen how I structure those videos, what I do is I take a book that is either middle grade or young adult, or it feels like beginner friendly to people who are new to fantasy. So I'll start with one, and then I get progressively more advanced or more fantasy heavy, or the age range gets higher. And with Blood Heir, I talked about how this is a great one after the Grishaverse books. So if you've read Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows, this just feels like the next thing after that. So a lot of times when you see authors who have written middle grade or younger YA books, they age up the characters as the readers get older or the tone ages up. And I think that's true of Shadow and Bone to Six of Crows. A lot of people read Shadow and Bone and it feels a lot younger, and then Six of Crows feels a lot more mature. Blood Heir, that's what I mean by it feels like the next step. It feels like an even more mature next level for people. So if you've read Six of Crows, and if you really like Six of Crows, and you really like the way that Leigh Bardugo explores the characters' backstories, and you like the setting of the Grishaverse, check out Blood Heir. The next question, question 7, is your favorite new author. This can be a debut author or new to you. I'm just going to say all the authors that were talked about in question 1. Patel, Ford, and Kingfisher. I'm so sorry. I keep bringing up Nettle and Bone, but the next question is your newest fictional crush, and I loved Fenris so much. I loved Fenris so much in that book. He's not the biggest part of the book, but once he's introduced, immediately I'm like, oh, I love this guy. And then also, I didn't watch this show this year, but I don't care. I'm taking a second to talk about how much I love Vi from Arcane. Okay, because Vi is the best. I feel like I've never had a stronger crush, I feel like, on a fictional character than Vi. I have such a crush on her. Oh my gosh. I want to be her. I want to know her. I want to learn to fight because of her. She's just the best. She's so cool. If you haven't watched Arcane yet, go watch Arcane. It's so good. The next question is a new favorite character. So I did really enjoy Keika'i from the book of the same name. I'm going to pick a specific character from Engines of Empire. I enjoyed what was going on in their perspective, but I also enjoyed the character themselves, and that would be Rosamund. So this is the matriarch of the Hawksburg Guild, and she is the perspective where you get the most political intrigue within. And there are times where you kind of want to shake her a little bit because you're like, hey, come on, because you as the reader know certain things that she doesn't know. But also I just enjoy her as a character. I like how she tries to be with her children. Sometimes she can be very harsh with them. Sometimes she can be very protective of them. And because you get her children's perspective, you see their side of things. And at first maybe it alters how you see her. But then the more you get of her perspective, the more you understand why she is the way she is. And I just really enjoyed her perspective. I enjoyed the way that she also tries to have compassion. But then when she needs to be ruthless, she can be ruthless. I just really enjoyed reading her perspective. She was my favorite perspective in that book. The next question is a book that made you cry. I've never cried reading a book. I think many of you know this, but I have to mention a nonfiction book that I almost started crying. I think it's the closest I've ever come to crying, and that would be The Girl with Seven Names. just so many moments throughout the book were really emotional, but there's a moment at the end, and it's weird the things that get you. So there's a moment toward the end, I mentioned this when I talked about this book recently, where finally this girl has somebody do just a random gesture of kindness, and it makes the biggest difference. And I don't know what it was about that moment, but it's just like she's needed, I'm getting emotional talking about it. She's needed that for so long, just something to go right. And when it comes from a random stranger who's just willing to do something, it's kind of a big deal what this person does. And what's nice is I looked in, she talks about it later in the book, how she did get the chance to find that person again and sort of reunite with them in a sense. And I just thought it was such a beautiful thing. It's kind of like, okay, I guess spoilers for the Schindler's List movie. But really quick, if you've seen Schindler's List, obviously that is one of the most tragic movies. But the part, oh my gosh, I gotta like really hold it together so I don't start crying thinking about it. The part at the end, oh my gosh, when he starts looking at everything, I'm making all these noises because it's my effort to not cry. When he's looking at all of the things, like his car and all the other things, and he thinks about, how many more people could I have saved if I just, oh my gosh, I can't. That part in that movie of all the things is the part where I'm like, oh my gosh, and I just have to hold it in. I'm so sorry if you're wearing headphones and that was loud, but that kind of feeling, that, like I said, the most random of things that suddenly hits, I don't know what it was, but that was toward the end of the book. Obviously, Schindler's List moment over. That was the end of the book that this nice thing happens. And I was already emotional because I'd read so many emotional things up to that point. And so it was like I was about to hit that breaking point. I'm like, you're almost done with the book. Just hold it together. Don't start crying now. Don't ruin your book with your tears. So that book, it was a lot. Number 11 would be a book that made you happy. So I'm really sorry. Nettle and Bone, that one made me happy just because there's so many funny moments in that book. And there's also an animal companion in that story, and it's cute and it's silly. So that one made me happy. There were definitely some things in some of the romance books that I picked up. The next question is the most beautiful book that you've gotten this year. I mentioned having anticipated releases, and these books happen to also all be gorgeous. Daughter of the Moon Goddess, A Magic Steeped in Poison, I think is one of the most beautiful covers I've ever seen, especially because the art style, this sort of pastel watercolor, that look is something I don't see very often, and the colors used, you don't see that on covers very often. Also, The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. The last question is book that you need to read by the end of the year. There's a lot, but I did a video, 22 books I want to read in 2022, and I'm actually doing okay as far as how many of the books from that list I've actually picked up, but there are quite a few more that I would like to read from that list before the end of the year, so I'm just going to say books from there. That's it for the mid-year book tag. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what your answers to these questions would be. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.